So before I hand over to our programme consultants, I'd just like to explain some of the background to the programme, which, as you can see, is a natural progression from our well-established management development and enabling leaders programmes, so expertly run by our colleague Wendy Ann Shapiro. The timing for this couldn't have been better, I hope you agree. Over the past year, directors, boards and business owners have faced unprecedented challenges and have had to make some tough decisions, often without the appropriate data or information to hand. It's now become clear that these challenges will continue throughout 2021, and strong leadership and governance has really been more crucial to support the robust decision-making that is needed to ensure the survival and growth of businesses across the region. Similarly, assuming a team of intelligent, well-meaning and hard-working directors doesn't always guarantee an effective board, but when it does, you have an incredible asset. Moving on, we can see, incidentally, we are also expanding our international trade training for those of you who are importing, exporting. I'm sure you're coming up with a number of challenges we're hearing about at the moment. So please, if you want any more details on this, also call us. The programme that we put together recognises that business acumen, or the ability to understand and cope with different business situations, is not a single skill, but a wide toolkit of aptitudes and knowledge. Our workshops explore key aptitudes that individuals with proven business acumen have, which would include strong management mindset, financial acumen, decisive self-confidence, flexibility and the adaptive to change, for example. Our programme consultants, who we meet shortly, have worked hard to ensure that the content of these programmes is fresh and relevant to the challenges leaders are facing today. The workshops we describe as agile. They can easily be updated or tweaked for a particular audience. And as you can see, we're going to run programmes, so open programmes for all to attend, as well as in-house programmes for specific leadership teams and boards. As things stand, we're going to deliver these workshops virtually in half-day sessions, which is designed to help keep the focus levels high, but also allow the attendees the opportunities to work on their business in the afternoon. Okay, that's enough from me. And really what I'd like to do now is introduce you to our programme consultants. So Anna's experience comes from a range of sectors, as you'll hear, which includes construction, engineering, professional services, finance, pharmaceutical, media, travel, etc. Her expertise lies in enabling boards, directors and the governance professionals who support them to understand how their beliefs, thinking, decision-making and behaviour impact the systems they lead. At the heart of all her work lies the situational and intelligence philosophy and methodology developed with Dr. Lawrence Lyons. Perhaps more importantly, she's also a great rugby fan and can get quite heated about the Saracens. Jean was raised in Mauritius in South Africa and has over 30 years experience lecturing in the fields of finance and strategy in over 30 countries. He deals with directors, all levels of management, and work with numerous boards to assist in strategic planning, corporate governance and board effectiveness. Again, more importantly, he has completed over 30 marathons, including 2 ultra marathons, and is due to enter the first stage of 21's Tour de France for amateurs, which is 187 kilometres, raising money for prostate cancer. So best of luck with that. So Jean, on that note, over to you, sir. And you're on mute, Jean.
Okay. Well, afternoon, everybody, and thank you for making time to spend time with us. And Callum, thank you for inviting me. As I said, the background is French Mauritian, with 17 years in Mauritius. I spent 15 years in South Africa and been out here in the UK now since 1989. So this explains the accent, so you won't spend the next 20 minutes or so wondering where on earth is this person from. So the accent is not Flemish, Canadian, it is what it is, I'm really sorry. And now British, by the way. no need to marry anybody to stay in the country, or latterly divorce anybody with Brexit to stay in the country. So you've got me, you stuck with me pretty much. I've been in this field for many, many years all over the world, and I used to live in Solihull in the West Midlands. So I'm very familiar with the region, and it's nice to kind of be involved again at this stage. Next slide, please. If I could have the next slide, please, Chris.
It's on.
Voilà, we're here. Okay. My little cameo today is to spend about 10-15 minutes or so to sort of just walk you through some of the ideas that we have and some of the programs that we will run. As Callum highlighted, these are done over half-day sessions to allow you just to work and, without sort of infringing and crowding out the work situation. They will all be virtual. It's something we have learned and we hopefully getting better at. We've been doing it literally since April of last year, since the pandemic, and used a multiplicity of platforms. And certainly client feedback throughout the world seems to be that people are getting used to it. The learning kind of works, and so that's not an impediment onto sort of anyone sort of learning. In terms of some of the programs we have lined up, and as Callum suggested, they can be done both. Well, some of them will be run kind of in an open with folk invited, but there's also we also have the capability to run some of these things in company where we can actually sort of design, redesign, change, to suit the needs of you and your directors and your team. So it's something we do all the time anyway. So this is something which is quite easy. Essentially, today, I'm here to speak about possibly about 5 potential interventions that we will bring to you and to the region. And you can see for yourself the attributes of a great director, the role of finance in business, assessing the strategic health of the business, how to get the most or the best out of your board, and the attributes of a non-executive director. And by the way, for a fuller content, it's all on the website with more content and more details. But just a couple of thoughts for the time being. I think what you'll find with the programs is they're all highly practical. We are practitioners, and certainly we'd like to think that our experience will be reflected in the content, will be reflected in the approach, and will be reflected in your learning, which is above all what this is about. And if I could piece each one in turn, the attributes of a great director. Well, here's the thing: no one teaches you to be a director. I guess it's like parenting. You can read the books, you can listen to your parents, but your parents have long forgotten what it's like to have kids. And nothing prepares you when you bring that baby home for the first time. Absolutely nothing prepares you for that. And there's so much to learn about being a good director or a bad director. Our courses will also focus on calamities, because often we learn best from bad practice than good practice. I'm sure many of you are watching or tracking the Kids Company court case in the High Court. You'll recall a Kids Company, the charity, run by that flamboyant lady with the colourful outfits, Camilla, what's her name, who lied to the Prime Minister for good measure. And now she claims to have a neurological condition, which meant she had memory lapses when she was at Kids Company. And she also felt she really wasn't a director, she was a leader, and therefore the ambit of the Companies Act should not apply to her predicament. And she's hoping the court will take into account her medical condition. Methinks we've seen this movie before, people going to court and developing sort of medical impediments. So loads of bad practice there, which we'll cover. And you would have seen over the last 2 weeks or so, the government is planning on to disqualify some and at the time and past directors of Carillion because of what happened. And if you haven't done so already, the House of Commons Select Treasury report on Carillion, I think, is a must read for all directors, and you can download it freely, basically. In terms of it's 100 pages, but it's a hell of a lot less than that. It is just and I think what Carillion teaches us, or rather reminds us, is that with a director, the technical skills are often there. It's on the attitude, the mindset, and the soft skills that they go wanting, and that they actually sort of go a bit ape. Now, I think director, given the region, we can expand the argument for many sizable businesses where maybe the leaders perhaps are not directors, but they have to run a business nevertheless. And I started my first business in 1994, and I can assure you, it's one thing to be a technical specialist, but when you run a business, you have to be technical specialist and do everything else or manage everything else. And many entrepreneurs just simply don't have that capability. So that's kind of what we'll talk about. We'll talk about the regulatory, obviously, the legal requirements, but we'll also spend time on, and we'll share with you what we see out there in terms of good ones and in terms of bad ones. In terms of finance, that's one module which I'll be doing myself. I'm not an accountant, I'm an ex-banker, but it kind of doesn't make me a bad person. But essentially, all of us need to have some kind of understanding of the financial impact of decisions in our businesses. We need to understand the topic to manage better, to manage the numbers, which means you need to understand the numbers. We need to understand to speak to advisors, to speak to banks, to speak to accountants, to speak to auditors, to make presentations and all these things. And it's really a capability which is so important. And in so many businesses, what I tend to find is there is blind faith on the finance director, or worse still, if there's a remote accountant involved in the business, and it is left to that person or these people, which brings a whole set of difficulties, which brings a whole kind of range of issues legally and elsewhere as well. And I think what I found, particularly in small to mid-sized businesses, is over the years, the entrepreneurs pick up a couple of things. They learn as they go along. And often what you find is what this intervention does is to plug a couple of gaps, improve a couple of concepts. And certainly this is one particular program where to do it in-house is better, because we can look at your annual report, your accounts, your management information, your dashboard, analyze one of your competitors maybe, so we can really make it you and internalize for the board or the management team to get the kind of value out of this exercise that people should get. The strategic health is obviously a good interactive and highly discussive program. So whereas the finance program will be very much learning by doing, this is sort of highly discussive. In my experience, and I work with about 8 to 10 boards a year, and so does Anna, and we have for many years. And we can tell you with complete assurance and authority, boards, management teams, business owners tell us time and time again, we don't devote enough time to strategy or strategic discussions. And when we do, or when they do, even then I find that they're not having the right conversations. They really are not having the right conversations. Okay, COVID-19 is exceptional for what it has done. But nevertheless, COVID-19 will present many unbelievable opportunities in some sectors, which we need to sort of to be mindful of. And certainly one observation about the whole strategic piece, which I see with companies which regrettably are having some issues because of the pandemic, is that we're focusing on cost cutting, we're focusing on tidying up, we're focusing on cutting on trying to stop the cash bleeding, which are all very valid and very necessary. But financial desperation should not replace strategic thinking. And whereas you need a good FD or a finance controller or the finance person to really step up in tough times, we have to be very careful not to allow them to start running the business. And this is something which I see a fair bit of, And the point we keep telling all accountants, cost cutting is not a strategy. As important as it may be, and as necessary as it may be, that is not strategic. It's tactical. It's something you may have to do. And hopefully what we'll do there is to sort of share our thinking, share our experiences, and broaden the scope of the conversation to make sure that the boards, the team really have a strategic process that can stand up to scrutiny, and that the right conversations happen, and hopefully, ultimately, we make the right type of decisions. To give you one quick example, a colleague of mine makes the point, he was a former barrister, and when he is now very successful a non-exec director, and when he presented argument in court for the first time as a barrister, he prefaced his statement by saying, "Your Honor, Your Lordship, whatever, I think." And the judge stopped him dead in his tracks and said, "Counsel, I don't care what you think. I want you to present argument and present the facts." And he could hear his bosses having a good giggle behind him, because the chances are they got caught a few years ago. And he said, "It's a lesson I never forgot. It's a lesson I never forgot when people say, I think." And our role often is to ensure that there's an intelligent conversation, that intelligent and proper processes are actually put in place. So the time of the board, the time of the top team is really, really, really well spent on sort of issues of strategy. Callum made a very good point in his intro that just assembling a team of highly paid, highly intelligent, and hardworking people does not guarantee that the team will work well. The dynamics of a board are very, very different to that of a normal team. Often directors don't see each other that often. Perhaps you have the balance of executive and non-executive, if you are of a certain size, to actually contend with. And it's a very, very different set of dynamics where the buck stops here literally. And we see things over the years, time and time again. For example, we see boards engaging in huge amount of discussions, but actually not making a decision. They actually do not make a decision. And for example, we suggest it's not a bad idea on the board agenda as a preface to the meeting to kind of mark which items are for discussion and which items are for decision making, because it then actually gets the mindset going. People on boards are better than others at playing the game called politics. It's about developing your skills as a director, as an influencer, as a communicator, which is really important. But the one question we often pose people is this: can you recognize when you are being influenced? What are the telltale signs that actually you are being influenced? Would you be comfortable in getting an outsider coming to watch the board and give you some kind of rating? What kind of feedback do you give yourself after each board meeting? And in the consultancy work that we do, it's quite interesting. We really like to do a series of one-to-one with directors, because in the one-to-one interviews, you can achieve so much more than a sterile questionnaire, where you can sort of get under their skin. And I mean that in a nice way, by the way, by asking the kinds of questions that would be difficult in a questionnaire. I mean, for example, assuming the board is of a certain size, the one question I always ask is this: who should be the next director to leave the board and why? Now, this almost raises a little smile to begin with, but as people develop their arguments, something typically very, very profound follows suit. And it could be about personality, it could be about personnel, or it could be about functions, for example. And finally, many businesses of a mid-sized nature get to a point where they feel that I need a non-exec director, or we need a non-exec director. And it's about not just getting the right person for your business and for your board, but also recognizing what makes a good non-executive director. And if some of you in the room and your colleagues, as I'm sure you have intentions of developing a portfolio of net positions once the main career is over, there are many lessons that I think we need to learn. I mean, I've been a net a few times myself, and mistakes people typically make, and certainly I've made them. We try to relive our executive role. We think we have all the answers by virtue of our experience. We preface things by saying when I was at, which is dangerous because we're importing a toolkit of times gone by into a present situation. So a non-exec director, there are skills and there are capabilities which are very, very, very different. A non-exec is a coach, is a mentor, is a confidant, is an advisor. He or she becomes the black box of the company. They should be there to make sure that the agenda runs smoothly, that we don't have wasteful conversations, that the board meeting runs well, and also do a fair bit of off-board work as well. And if you're big enough to have committees, that's where your non-execs really, really earn their money in the work which they do. So it's an important position, and many companies use non-execs badly, and many non-execs walk into the position really blissfully unaware of the challenges which they face. A successful executive career does not guarantee that you will have a successful non-executive career and performance. It's not an automatic proxy. So these are the kinds of practical considerations that we will cover on that program as well. I think I've covered my allocated 15 minutes, Callum, so passing over to Anna, I think.
Brilliant. I'll just move the slide on and make sure it works. So Anna, handing over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Callum. And I even unmuted myself, which is the most popular phrase, isn't it, now this year? You're still on mute. So thank you for inviting me, Callum. And it's wonderful to speak to. I see there are 88 of you now. So I don't know where that was in the sort of the guess as to how many of the 93 would be here with us. But let me talk to you a little bit about building board effectiveness and build on some of the ideas that Jean has shared with you. We all recognize, whether you are a director of a micro business or a multinational, that your own biases and your beliefs actually impact your intentions and the decisions that you take. And you're under scrutiny. Your behavior is under scrutiny from a wide range of different people. And therefore, it is inherent on us to actually understand how people perceive us and the impact that we make on them. And I think that's particularly important in the world that we're living in at the moment. A lot of people would say in a continuous crisis, you really need to have empathy. You need to walk a mile in the shoes of the various people that you're trying to influence. Jean mentioned influencing a little bit earlier. I spent yesterday morning speaking to governance professionals who are working in the further education arena, and they were looking at the way in which they could actually persuade people of the wisdom of governance. For what it's worth, we start this series of workshops. Callum, can I have the next one, please? Thank you. Looking at leadership for governance, because as you sit at the top of whatever organization that you're looking after, the buck stops with you. You can't delegate that responsibility to anybody else. And if it's across the kitchen table and you're looking at your partner and you're trying to hand the baby over to them, it doesn't necessarily work. You know, if you're the director, you are in charge. You have to maintain an idea of the whole system that you're looking after. And you're responsible for producing some sort of framework for navigating through the maze. Now, I reckon that of the 88 of you sitting there, there will be a number of engineers who will be looking very closely at this particular picture. Okay, it's a maze. It's a natural maze. I'm speculating that actually it might be box, because there seems to be some box blight there. So if I've got any gardeners in the audience, you might be spotting that. Some of you might be saying, oh, you know, actually, I think that we should be working out how to get to the center of this maze. But the system that you actually are directing might actually want you to get out of the maze as opposed to be in it. The shrewd among you will have seen that it appears to be floating on water. So actually trying to navigate this maze may require you to have your galoshes on. Who knows? You need to be flexible in the way you think when you're leading governance. You need to actually be willing to entertain alternative perspectives. So that's why you would be looking at the people who said to you, well, it's blindingly obvious how you actually navigate that maze. You get a large pair of stilts and you walk across it, don't you? Thinking outside the box. So introducing people who don't think like you, who will sit around that boardroom table, who will challenge you, becomes quite critical. These were things that Jean was talking to you about earlier. I'm fascinated by the fact that some of you may be aware that the World Economic Forum launches next week, and they will be talking about global risks. And actually, if you look at the paper that they published yesterday, you'll find that a lot of the information that they're actually giving you about global risks goes to the strapline, Callum, I see on this slide, which is business is better done together. Business is better done together is collaboration and partnership and so on is coming out of all of the analysis of the global risks that we're all facing. The suggestion is regional collaboration, so that should make you all feel very happy, and the fostering of innovation as well. So I'm following some of the things that is happening in the Black Country, where people are being incredibly imaginative in solving the various challenges we face with COVID and beyond COVID. Businesses choosing to come up with different supply chains, different ways of creating value for their various customers. It's all about creating relationships and rebuilding relationships with people. There is a poll with this particular module, which is about who scrutinizes your decisions and actions. I think Chris has made that available to you. So if you're able to, you can actually select multiple of these, but can you actually submit your responses to who is scrutinizing your decisions and actions? Is it just internal stakeholders? Is that where your focus of attention is? Is it the supply chain to your customers? What about regulators and compliance organizations? Are they curious about what you're up to? Are you in their sights? And what about the fact that actually all of us are very exposed in terms of professional observers and the media watching what we're up to? So if I could give you a couple of minutes to complete that, please. And I think, Chris, when you feel that people have had enough time to submit, I think at that stage we probably go on to the second of the modules, please. Callum. Callum mentioned this at the very beginning. At the heart of all the work that I do with boards, with directors individually, across many sectors, is some work that I did with a gentleman called Dr. Lawrence Lyons. We tried to put together a fairly pragmatic idea of how we think. Now, the Americans would call this being savvy, and we might say, well, it's having wisdom or using judgment. I'm not quite sure what the West Midlands sort of term for this is, but I look forward to Callum telling me. If you look into the blue area, and remember what Jean had to say, you really do need to understand the strategic context in which you operate. So you're trying to actually understand what you're there to do, what your purpose is, the ethos you have in your organization, a sense of the direction you're going in, and nowadays, you know, your ability to flex who you're doing it for, what you're doing, how you're doing it, and so on is pretty imperative. We have to be agile in the situation we find ourselves in. So understanding your strategic context is extremely important for all directors. If you go down to the red then and you say, look, I confront situations, everything is a situation. Every day I am trying to achieve objectives. I have a bunch of stakeholders that I need to influence, engage with. Those stakeholders are motivated by a variety of different triggers, and I need to understand how to bring them on board in every situation. And to that, if we go to the gold, I bring my reputation, the way people describe me, the things that they think about me. I bring strengths, some talent that I can use and some that is potential. And I also have habits that I've formed, approaches that have worked for me in the past. I think Jean said to you, of course, if you say, well, I've seen one of these before and therefore I'm going to bring that previous knowledge to the situation, it may be inappropriate. So all the time you're trying to use that wisdom and judgment. If you understand your strategic context, the blue, you can recognize what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to convince from the red, and you know what you have in the kit bag in the gold, you are more likely to intervene in each situation in a way that will achieve the objectives that you have. You'll also recognize that some people will be swayed by the evidence and the logic. Again, Jean, you mentioned that, didn't you? You sort of said, look, evidence-based decision-making is what we should be going for. The greatest frustration within boardrooms is often that you have a business case, you have the facts, and yet not everybody within the boardroom will actually agree with you. Sometimes they're motivated by emotion, and if you have a good relationship with them, then they're going to do what you ask them to do because they like you, because you have created that rapport. Sometimes they share your values, they share your ethos, they believe in the same things as you. And in charities in the public sector, that's probably very apparent. In small businesses as well, you know, that glue that holds you together is often a shared ethos, a shared set of values. But I have to say, and I'm looking to Jean now to see whether he smiles at me, an awful lot of the time within boardrooms, people are motivated by interest. And it isn't necessarily the interest of the organization, it's often self-interest. And what you're trying to do, of course, in your leadership approach is actually work out the extent to which you can align what you're trying to achieve with the motivations of the people concerned. And when you do that shrewdly, you achieve more. But trying to do that, relying only on your own belief about yourself is very difficult. And so most directors I know actually have some sort of sounding board, somebody who they can bounce ideas off, somebody they trust to have those difficult conversations about when they've got it right and when they've got it wrong. So there is a poll behind this. Can I ask you, Chris, to pop up the poll? Have you got a sounding board? Have you got somebody who acts as your sounding board? And if so, who is it? Can I give you a moment to actually consider your response and submit that as well, please? And Chris, when you feel everybody has had a chance to complete the poll, because you can see how many people have done so, can you take it down and we'll move on to the next workshop? Brilliant. I had an interesting experience a few years ago working with a group of directors who had gone out for a bit of a walk and a lunch break during a workshop that we were running. And one of them came in with an extremely large box, looking slightly embarrassed about it. And of course, everybody said, well, what's in the box? And it was from a toy store. And it had an extremely expensive group of Lego. And I don't think it was Millennium Falcon, but I think it was from the Star Wars group. It reminded me that actually I should be going up into the attic and getting all of the Star Wars Lego that we have. And I don't know whether you've spent some of your time in lockdown returning to games that you have enjoyed in the past. I've shown you this Lego idea because Lego used to come in buckets, and there were buckets of bricks and you hadn't got a diagram of what you were trying to make. So you could use your imagination and you could put together something from this bucket of different bricks. And now, of course, there's a little bit more structure to the way that Lego is sold, in that it comes in boxes and you have a diagram and you make the thing that they have told you about. But when you're building better boards, you're trying to build a board that is fit for the future as opposed to just going to deliver for now. You're trying to bring in insights that will actually help you to be prepared to actually venture into an uncertain future. Certainly having some sense of common purpose and a common ethos helps you to perform as a board. It helps people to trust you as well. But if it's too comfortable, if you all think in the same way, if you all come from the same kind of industry sector, the same geographical territory, you will find yourself thinking in the same way. And you'll be comfortable in that because it doesn't challenge you at all. The most difficult thing is to entertain somebody who is a bit of a maverick, who doesn't think in the same way as you, who starts from a different, a different standpoint. And that diversity of view is needed around every boardroom. And sometimes it's because you actually go out and you attract a new director. Sometimes you start to wisely use the advisors who are helping you. So it's not necessarily just the board, it's the people who actually provide intelligence to the board that need to bring a diversity of views. But having that diversity of insights and views is not enough. There has to be a good discussion, challenging discussion, difficult conversations with respect for other people. The challenge has to be for the ball and not the man or woman, Callum, to use an analogy from the rugby world. So using advisors wisely, preparing the board that you have to be fit to navigate you into the future is going to be very critical. And each of you sit in different situations. Each of you need different ingredients to fill the gap that you might have. But of course, you actually have to work out whether you have a gap in the capability you require around that table, the strategic decision-making table, and only you will know how you actually look at that. So, Chris, can I ask you to pop up the poll, please? So how do you identify and fill gaps around your board? It is quite interesting, and Jean and I have both been involved with board reviews, board refresh, health checks, and so on, that the whole thing can become quite mechanistic. And so you can have what looks like a really effective process for bringing together the right people around the table, but it doesn't have heart. It really hasn't used imagination in terms of how you bring together a really rich group of people who will actually challenge each other, who will respect each other, who are well chaired. This is not easy territory. And that's from, again, the micro business up to the multinational. One of the wisest things I heard somebody say, who was quite experienced in putting together some sort of annual review of what I've got and what I need, is I have to change the way I do it every year, because otherwise people actually just crank the handle and it becomes the mechanistic process. So that is building better boards, how you actually bring together the right people for the strategic decision making. The last window I wanted to look through was picking up on Jean talking about, a strategic health check of your organization, look at how you put together that agenda. Well, you've got your agenda. Somehow you actually have to make sure that you program manage the complexity of what you've set in train. And one of the issues here is that we are not particularly good in many organizations and many sectors at scoping what we actually intend achieving with strategic change. In another world, in another role, I found myself writing meta-methodologies for whole industries on leading strategic change and looking at what the academic world said and practically and pragmatically how you would actually make that work. And there isn't one right process for doing strategic change, but there are some common ingredients. So certainly whenever I've looked at an organization who's been trying to bring about a fairly substantive change, I'm actually looking at what that Gantt chart looks like. I'm now talking to the engineers in the room. I want to see how many change initiatives you've got on the go. I want to see what you've put on the top line, because if the top line doesn't actually say, I really need to be thinking about the stakeholders I've got to engage and how I'm going to engage them, then the likelihood of success with your strategic change program is minimalized quite significantly. If as a board of directors, as an individual director, you don't understand that your sponsorship role is for the whole life of the program, then that's a bit of a problem. If, as you sit there within the boardroom, you can't keep and maintain an overview of all the various initiatives that you've put into effect, and you don't see where the conflicts and interdependencies are, and you're not willing to intervene to stop things that shouldn't continue, and you're not willing to change resources into other areas, then again, these are the things that derail the strategic change process. All of the things I've just spoken about there come out of the minds of people who put together engineering programs or technology programs. And it's interesting that we don't actually recognize that kind of program management capability as being essential in the boardroom. It really is. It's one of the things that you want to actually attract into the boardroom. I mentioned stakeholder engagement there. So my last thought, Callum, before I hand back to you, is Lawrence and I put together an idea of how you map your stakeholders. We have a process for doing it. And we recognize that some people want you to win, they want you to achieve, and they understand what you're up to. So they'll be your advocates. Now, clearly you want some powerful advocates, but there are other people who understand exactly what you're trying to achieve, but they haven't necessarily declared that they would like to help you. They're sitting on the fence, they're spectators. And behind the spectators, there may well be people who will prosper if you fail. Saboteurs, if you like. It might be a good idea to understand who those are within your worlds. There are people who aren't engaged with you at all, and you have to work out whether that matters or not, because you can't engage everybody. And then you are the cheerleader for a great group of people who will follow you anywhere. They haven't got a clue where you're going, but they'll follow you. And it's trying to actually work out how you are going to act as a catalyst, a leader, a sponsor throughout the whole process, bringing together a motivated community of stakeholders who want you to achieve the objectives that you have. Callum, that's my little piece, and I hand back to you at that stage.
Yeah, I think if Chris wants to put up the final poll, then we can get that, and then we can have a look at the scores on the doors.
Quite right. This was me asking actually of everybody, you know, how complex is the picture that you're trying to lead there? So how many change initiatives have you got on the go in your organization?
Okay, we'll move on to the answers now. So Chris, if you're ready to do that, I'll change the slide. Anna can take us through them.
I'm not surprised by that. The focus in this time of crisis has reverted to being internal, largely internal. A lot of organizations are getting bound up with, very importantly, looking after their own people. But sometimes it's at the expense of looking externally. So the focus internally can actually derail you. There isn't a right or a wrong thing here, but how fascinating that nobody thinks that professional observers and the media are watching what they do. I'd check that out if I were you. Second poll, please, Chris. Sounding boards. There are a number of people that I'm coaching across most sectors and most sizes. And there are a number of people that I coach who sit at the top of fairly large organizations. And they say one of the things that they like is, yes, they have somebody who who acts as a sounding board, but quite often they have somebody who comes from a completely different generation. So they have a reverse mentor, if you like. They have a young person who walks in the shoes of technology, and they find that useful. The other thing that I noticed there is that a lot of you are using somebody who also is on the board. So that buddying within boards is very common now. And the idea of actually getting together with a director that you trust from another business is also growing. I think always the professional coach and mentor will probably be the one that comes further down the list. The third poll, please, Chris. That would seem to say to me that when I recognize it, I'll do something about it. The idea of going through a systematic audit and recruiting and doing that on an annual basis is what you would do if you were in a listed entity. So, you know, that's the kind of approach and process you would find in a larger organization. And certainly if you are in any kind of regulated organization, you'd be expected to do the bottom one. So it's been much more systematic in the way that you succession plan. In small businesses, it isn't perceived to be an important part of what you do. However, the reality is, if you are complacent and you just actually continue to run your business with the people that you always have, and you're not actually looking at the extent to which you have the right capability, to guide your organization into the future, that might be quite dangerous. So these are important questions to just reflect on, and I've given you very little time to do it. So I think that's something to go back and have a think about. And the fourth one, which is about the leading of strategic change. That's a great relief to me because most people probably can get their hands around between 1 and 5. But there are a fair number of you who are in there with up to 20. I have advised an engineering practice, a specialist engineering practice, over a number of years, who managed to actually get a 1-page, it was an A3 page, not an A4 page, where they actually could look at a picture of where everything was at all, continuously. And they mapped all of their change programs against the purpose of the organization and their strategic levers and so on 1 page. And everybody within the organization looked at that very regularly. That is how the engineering mind works. So for what it's worth, I add that as a sort of an idea. You might think about that. Thank you, Callum.